Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to paint a realistic mountain in acrylics. This mountain will be a rocky one with snow, so I want to show you the approach I take with this one. I'm going to paint this right side with a slightly desaturated blue here, which I used a small amount of burnt sienna and white added to the blue. This is the dark side of the mountain, where the snow's color reflects the sky. I will come back later to add more intricacies to this side. With this left side, I use a yellow-orange mixture of brown. You can obviously tell now where the sun is coming from. This part is going to get covered up a lot in layers and textures in this painting, so don't put too much pressure on yourself in picking out the exact color. On the sunlit side, I will paint the snow last, so for now we will focus on getting the rocky indentations on here first. Next, I paint these shadows on the bottom, being cast onto this mountain from another one in front of it. I'm mixing blue with some brown to get this dark indigo color. This part will have a lot of contrast with the crevices and rocky surface, so that's why you're seeing me paint these shapes coming out of it. Now I get my burnt sienna brown color and start painting the indentations here. The surface of this mountain is highly textured with all sorts of sharp angles everywhere, and so what I like to do first is work from big to small. These dark spots are going to be where the shadows are, and so to make it easier on myself, I'm using two general colors for this part. This regular brown you see here and a darker brown that I'll be using soon. I'll be going back and forth a lot during this painting, switching between the light and dark values as I stack up layer after layer. Now I switch to a light brown tannish color here and start adding where the light parts are going to be. Keep in mind, all these things I'm painting are not going to look the same once I'm finished. All I'm really doing here is getting an idea of what the main shapes of this mountain are going to look like. At this stage of the painting, don't be rigid with applying the paint. It's hard to do that when painting something like this because the sharp angles and details of this rocky surface can seem overwhelming, but taking the time to establish a foundation and stacking layers will help paint this gradually and more organically. Now I use a dark brown color. I'm further solidifying these dark indentations, continuing to paint loosely. As you're painting these, keep in mind the overall shape you're trying to create. The sunlight is coming from the left, and so as you paint, you are in a way sculpting these rocky formations that show off the different light and dark values. Then I get my burnt sienna and start to add more textures across the brightest areas. The rock formations are going to have texture and sharp angles both on a large scale and on a micro scale, and that's what I'm doing right now. This is an example of how I go from dark to light and back and forth. I'll come back later and add the highlights. I go back to the dark brown color and continue with refining these dark areas. Notice how this rocky surface is starting to come together with the way these crevices and indentations are connecting. Now I start to work on a smaller scale. I get a slightly lighter mixture than the one I used for the darker shadows, and I paint some relatively lighter parts inside these shaded areas. The entire surface of this mountain has sharp and rugged textures, and that includes these dark areas away from the sun. I'm painting these miniature cliffs here, but the main point is to create these rocky surfaces that show off the diffused light. Now I switch to my tan color and so the same thing in the lighter areas. I'm being more deliberate with my painting, but not yet that precise because I'm still going to go back and forth and continue refining the shapes. Another important thing I want to point out, and maybe you noticed this already, is that these shapes I'm creating are mostly solid, rectangular, and sharp. I'm not painting that many color gradients where there's blending or transitioning. This mountain surface is jagged, so there's going to be much more solid color values here than any smooth transitions. I go back and forth between these shades of brown and continue refining the edges of these cliffs and indentations. I'm starting to tighten up my painting more, and you can see now that I'm using a smaller brush, which by the way is the fine detailer one. Now we are at the part where things get more interesting. I'm going to do some heavy duty texturing all over this area here. I get my round brush and add more of these dark brown smudges everywhere. It looks like I'm working backwards, but soon you'll see why I'm doing this. Now I come back with my regular brown and start to repaint the cliff edges and formations. I do this along with the tan color, and you can start to see how much more rugged this mountain surface looks now. This is why it's important to layer the paint as well as go back and forth between the color values so that you can organically create this rocky surface. The great thing about this is that you can do this over and over again if you'd like because it just helps to refine it even more. Also, don't forget to do the same thing inside these dark areas. See how different this looks now compared to when we first started. Now I go back and do this texture again, this time inside the dark areas and once again in the light spots. Repeating these steps can really help with adding more variety to texture and the subsequent layers of detail that you stack on top. Then as I start painting the rocky surface again, I use smaller and more precise brushing, this time tightening things up. This is the part when you should start being more careful where you place your paint. Pay attention to accuracy here because you want to stay consistent to where the light is coming from as well as where it's absent. I hope you get the idea. Let's take a break from this and do some work on the right side. This is an easy part, so real quick I want to show you what I'll be doing for pretty much this whole side. I get a mixture of burnt sienna with some blue and apply the paint to create these rocky edges. Since the sunlight is away from here, you're not going to have the same extreme textures on this side, but I will come back later on to elaborate a little bit more on these rock formations. Anyways, let's go work on everybody's favorite part, the snow. So the reason why I wanted to paint the snow last on here is because the placement of it is extremely important when it comes to how it fits inside all these sharp edges and shadows of the mountain. I'll start off with the brightest parts. I'm not using a pure white mixture, by the way. It's going to have a tiny hint of yellow and orange because of the sunlight's diffusion of color onto it. I'm covering up some of these light areas because that's where the sun shines directly on it. Now I get the same color I used for the right side earlier in the video and apply the snow inside the shadowed areas. Many parts here will have the white snow meet the darker areas. The way I paint this is going to be the same as I have approached painting the mountain. I'm applying these base colors, adding texture to them, and then applying a bright color again. As you continue painting the snow, don't go overboard with it because you still want to leave some of the rock exposed. Also, you can still change the formation of the rock that you're painting if you feel that something doesn't look right. Be flexible with making adjustments to everything. Now I get a couple different mixtures here and start to add texture to the white areas. This first mixture is just a very light blue with a hint of brown. The next one I'll be using is a very light brown with a hint of blue. Using color variety like this for texturing helps make a difference with having the final results looking more full and realistic. Also, with these same mixtures, I kind of share them along with the darker areas where I'm able to use these same colors to add a few brightening effects inside the shaded areas. Now I get the bright mixture again and reapply it over some of that texture, just like how I painted the rocky surface earlier. So after looking at this mountain so far, I think I went too far with painting the darker areas. I'm going to add some more exposed rock here to add some more brightness. So this is why it's always a good idea to do some independent study of whatever you're painting, whether it's directly painting from a reference photo or studying other images. On this left ridge over here, it's going to be predominantly snow, so I'll be doing the same thing here as I did with the other parts, except I'll add in a few patches of brown to show off some of the exposed rock. As I was painting this, I noticed how these acrylic paints have a more profound difference from oils than I thought, especially painting a mountain. These acrylics are very potent in the way they stick onto the canvas, with their bold and brilliant colors, and so they're not as forgiving as oils are. But what I really like about these acrylics I'm using is how precise they are with the brushing. I like how sharply I can apply detail with them, so I guess that's the trade-off. And so as I continue to work on this painting and video, I actually learned something for myself through this project. Mountains have more flat surfaces than I thought, and I realized that I need to paint more flat edges and surfaces here than I originally had planned. I realized that I needed to do more blending than I had anticipated. The way the cuts and edges merged with the snow became difficult to piece together because of the intricate layout of the textures. I had to revisit many areas and keep reapplying more color variety and texture. On this bottom part here, I think I came at a much better approach, where I was finally able to sequentially put everything together in a more organized fashion. The difference here though is that the overcast shadow on the bottom will need to be gently transitioned. Therefore, I needed to use more dry brushing to blend the color gradients here where the dark meets the light. At the same time, I also had to reconcile all those sharp edges and snow clusters that were covering this area. I've been painting so many other things like landscapes, trees, portraits, but I feel like I was a newcomer to painting this mountain. I definitely want to try next time painting with oils and see how different the results turn out for the same subject. So even though initially I did take longer than expected in the beginning, painting this mountain still had the same steps that I had laid out from the beginning. First, you paint the base colors and values, then you aggressively add texture, Next, you add some mid-range highlights, then texture again, and add the brightest highlights. And you could paint the snow somewhere in between. Just pick a point where you feel comfortable enough to know the layout of where you can place the snow, then continue working on that. Using color variety and texture makes a huge difference, especially in flat areas. Painting a mountain is like painting a rock, except I think here you'll have more jagged angles and flat edges to piece together. So we've reached the end. Using acrylic paint does have its advantages and disadvantages, but if you apply the right techniques, you can still pull it off. I hope that you found value in this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe for more tutorials like this. I'll see you in the next video.